The strange mind of Adolf Hitler has baffled the world for over half a century. We all know what Hitler did, but why did he do it? Now a surprising discovery has opened a new window into Hitler's bizarre mind. It is an unpublished sequel to Mein Kampf. Is this book genuine or a forgery? It appears to contain Hitler's master plan to dominate the world.
In Hitler's view, the war never stops.
Here you have it all spelled out very clearly. On the one hand, he's a complete fanatic and dogmatist, and on the other hand, he's very practical.
Most shockingly, it reveals that 11 years before the Second World War, Hitler was already planning to wage war on America. Alexandria, Virginia, 1958. Gerhard Weinberg is among a team of historians combing through millions of documents captured from Nazi Germany. The documents, the entire archive of the German nation, had been seized by the Allies and used to prosecute war criminals in the Nuremberg trials. They include records of the German army, the SS, the Nazi Party. Now they are finally declassified, and Weinberg is helping review them before they are returned to Germany. Above all, he is seeking a prize. While Hitler's manifesto, Mein Kampf, is well known, for a decade, Weinberg has seen hints that Hitler wrote another book that is lost to history. The first clue appeared in an interview with one of Hitler's secretaries. She claimed that Hitler wrote a book on foreign policy that he never published. Weinberg is tantalized, but all too aware that it may never turn up.
I knew for a fact that enormous quantities of German records had been destroyed, partly deliberately by the Germans themselves, partly in air raids, big fires, so that there was, of course, the possibility that whatever copies of this book existed were gone.
Even if it is here, buried in the millions of documents, it could easily be overlooked. Then one day, he comes across a faded folder titled Partial Draft of Mein Kampf. But the document is not what it seems.
In the very opening sentences, Hitler refers to Mein Kampf, so it was obvious from the start of reading that this was not a draft of Mein Kampf.
Weinberg has discovered a 324-page typewritten manuscript by Hitler that no historian has seen before. It appears to be Hitler's long-lost book. But is it genuine? Hitler's writing has been the subject of a notorious fraud. In 1983, the German magazine Stern announces the greatest historical find of the century: the discovery of 60 volumes of diaries by Adolf Hitler. Stern buys them for the astronomical price of $3.3 million. An analysis by experts seems to support their authenticity. But then, West Germany's Federal Archives runs forensic tests. They reveal that the paper, glue, and ink were all manufactured after World War II. Historians soon discover that a forger plagiarized most of the entries from a collection of Hitler's speeches. The diaries are flagrant fakes. Weinberg made his discovery long before the diary hoax. But still, his find will come under intense scrutiny. He has to become a detective to determine if the manuscript is genuine or a clever fraud. He finds the first clues in the document itself.
Throughout the text, you find that the person at the typewriter clearly didn't know that punctuation was going to be needed. And so he hit the space bar and then discovered he needed a comma or a period. And we know that this was Hitler's habit, that is to dictate to a person who sat at a typewriter and banged away at it while he was dictating.
So far, the manuscript appears genuine. Hitler did not like to type. He also dictated Mein Kampf. The next clue comes from this report, dated May 1945, that accompanies the manuscript. An American officer writes that he confiscated the document from a manager of the Nazi publishing house, Joseph Berg. Berg told him that the unpublished book was written over 15 years earlier, but was locked in a safe, and he was under strict orders not to show it to anyone. Then, Weinberg learns of a letter from someone who wrote for the same publishing house. He claims that during the war, Berg unlocked the safe to show him the book.
Berg was probably not authorized to show it to anybody, but he figured, this is my buddy, and I'll show him something real special.
Now, 2 people have reported seeing the manuscript. A letter from Berg himself seems to provide further confirmation. Berg claims that Hitler stored a second copy of the manuscript in the Berghof, his house in Bavaria. To Weinberg, this solves another mystery. It explains why the last 100 pages are carbon copies on thinner paper.
As I turned the pages, it became clear there's a change, and the rest of it is carbon, and what you clearly had was a collating error.
Someone must have mixed up the pages when they separated the original and carbon copies for storage. This letter, uncovered in a German archive, helps answer Weinberg's final question. When was the book written? Hitler's secretary, Rudolf Hess, writes to a follower, Herr Hitler will probably be away from Munich until his trip to Berlin in order to write his book. It is dated the 26th of June, 1928. Weinberg believes he has proven that the book is genuine. But when we return, forensic scientists will test the manuscript for the very first time to determine whether Hitler's lost book is a fraud. Circumstantial evidence suggests that historian Gerhard Weinberg has discovered a long-lost book by Adolf Hitler. But what will the physical evidence say? Now at Germany's National Archives, for the first time ever, forensic scientists will test the authenticity of the manuscript. Peter Beyer is one of Germany's most respected forensic experts. He begins by examining the paper for obvious signs of age.
The book looks very old. You can see that at the color of the paper.
But color alone is no guide. Beyer will test for the presence of fluorescent chemicals that manufacturers began adding to paper after the war to whiten it. He places the manuscript next to a new sheet of paper and slides them under an ultraviolet light.
You see here the difference between an old and a new paper. The new one is fluorescing because of the chemical whitener, There's no fluorescence in the older paper. So this paper was produced before 1954.
Bayer has established that the paper is old. Now his colleague Bernard Haas will attempt to identify the age and make of the typewriter used to create the manuscript. First, he compares the type with a book that contains samples from hundreds of different machines. He is looking for minute differences. On a 1904 Continental typewriter, the bottom of the numeral 2 is curved. On a 1950 Torpedo, it is straight. On a 1906 Remington, the middle of the M touches the bottom line. On this later machine, it does not. The upper loop of the Adler's G on the left is smaller than the loop of the Mercedes on the right. Haas will also use special templates to measure the distance between characters and from one line to the next. Within 2 hours, they have their results. Haas has found that the manuscript was typed on a portable Remington made between 1920 and 1926. Mein Kampf was also typed on a portable Remington. To the document examiners, this suggests that not only is the manuscript authentic, but it was likely typed on the very same typewriter used for Mein Kampf. Experts now agree that Hitler's lost book is a genuine unpublished sequel to Mein Kampf. It is an uncensored snapshot of Hitler's mind, his clearest explanation of how and why he will lead Germany to war. But the ideas it presents have been brewing in his mind for over a decade. Munich, 1923. Adolf Hitler is the 35-year-old leader of a tiny nationalist party. Off a podium, Hitler strikes many as an awkward, shy young man. But on beer hall stages, he captivates audiences with a nasty brew of anti-Semitic and nationalist rhetoric.
Hitler had developed skills as an orator, and he practiced in front of a mirror. Gestures, cadences.
He had a mesmerizing look. He had very large blue eyes that would sort of lock on you. There was something in his fanatical belief in himself and in what he said that went way beyond his table manners and his shabby suit.
Hitler, a war veteran, is embittered by Germany's humiliating defeat in World War I. The streets are filled with the unemployed. Hyperinflation racks the economy. And communists threaten insurrection. Inspired by popular discontent, Hitler attempts to launch a coup from a Munich beer hall. He hopes to spark revolt on the streets and in army barracks. Instead, he is arrested.
He was arrested and had a trial and went to jail, and you would have thought that that would have been the end of that movement. But in fact, it was extraordinarily productive for him. It was one of the best things that ever happened to him.
The publicity first makes Hitler a national figure. And with free time on his hands in Landsberg prison, he sits down to write Mein Kampf, his first political manifesto. Prison conditions are hardly severe. Hitler shares common living space with 40 of his followers.
There was wine, there were sausages, there were hot baths, there were visitors, admirers sent food to the point where the place was a little bit like a delicatessen.
Some say the idea of writing a book comes from fellow prisoners who tire of his monologues. Seizing on the idea, Hitler begins dictating daily to his secretary and fellow inmate, Rudolf Hess. The book begins as an idealized autobiography. Hitler is applying for the position of dictator, and Mein Kampf is his job application. He wants to convince Germans that he is a rare genius whom Providence has chosen to save the nation. His followers talk him out of titling it 4.5 years of struggle against lies, stupidity, and cowardice. Instead, he calls it My Struggle.
Mein Kampf is generally dismissed as the worst written major political document in the history of modern Europe.
The syntax is awful. The thoughts are often muddled. It's very repetitive.
It is simply not the kind of book that people take to the beach and read on a sunny day.
Mein Kampf contains Hitler's rambling thoughts on everything from the proper education of youth to a brilliant analysis of the uses of mass propaganda. Yet buried in its confusing structure are also the keys to Hitler's plans for Germany's future. Few of Hitler's ideas are original. Since his youth, Hitler has been a voracious reader of crank theories, political and racial propaganda circulating throughout Europe. Hitler creates a new synthesis with one guiding principle, a vicious racism that distorts all of his thinking. Hitler claims that the Aryan Germans belong to a genetically superior race, the only one capable of creating great civilizations. And he rants that German intermarriage with inferior races must stop. Mein Kampf especially drips with obsessive phobic hatred of Jews. He accuses them of conspiring to destroy Western society, of spreading syphilis, inventing Bolshevism, and promoting democracy.
He's not talking about a Jewish threat that is going to come to fruition one day. He's talking about a Jewish conspiracy which right now is dangerously close to success.
The nationalization of our masses will succeed, he writes, only when their international poisoners are exterminated. But eliminating the Jews is just the first step.
The irony is that for Hitler, the final solution was just a preliminary. Once the Jews are removed, the struggle for existence can continue as nature intended it.
Hitler argues that the core of the German people is its farmers. And Germany's expanding population needs more land to survive. Land they must claim by war.
And in his mind, you must have more and more perfect Aryan babies, and yet you need land for them. The more land you have, the more people you need to populate it. The more people you have, the more land you need for those people. And so there's a kind of logic to it.
To Hitler, the obvious place to begin seizing land is in the East. Hitler despises the Slavs, the Russians, Ukrainians, and Poles. Like all non-Aryans, they are racially inferior.
We talked about the Slavic psyche, which was always condemned. Well, Slavs are slaves, he thought. So they were definitely inferior, just barely educable.
His goal is brutal, but necessary. German soldiers will expel and enslave the Slavs of Eastern Europe. He will turn their land over to farmers of good German stock. What Hitler has in mind is the North American example.
One of the few things that Hitler really admires about the United States was its treatment of Native Americans. As far as Hitler was concerned, the United States government identified a group that was racially inferior and ruthlessly drove them onto reservations in a systematic way.
It is the peoples of brutal will who will conquer, Hitler writes. Germans, following their destiny, will prove they are the master race. But in Mein Kampf, Hitler discusses the United States very little. That discussion he saves for an unpublished sequel. We'll reveal the contents of Hitler's secret book when we return. Munich, 1925. Despite a 5-year prison sentence, Hitler wins parole in just 9 months. Now he abandons any hope of winning power militarily. Instead, he intends to win it democratically through ceaseless campaigning. But in the mid-20s, Germany's economy has greatly improved. His following remains small.
Hitler himself was considered a joke figure, the stuff of comedy and vaudeville. You would always get a laugh telling a Hitler joke.
He was strange. He was obviously, to some people, he seemed like a weirdo. He dressed strangely. He walked around with a whip.
The private Hitler is equally odd. He has no friends, only hangers-on. Even to those closest to him, he always appears to be acting, ever conscious of his image. By 1928, 4 years after his failed coup, Hitler's following is beginning to grow. The Nazis are now a national party, and Hitler believes he is gaining ground. In elections, the dictator-to-be calls for an alliance with Mussolini and a new war. But Hitler's rivals accuse him of taking bribes from the Italian dictator. The Nazis receive less than 3% of the vote. It is a resounding defeat. Infuriated, Hitler resolves to explain his ideas even more clearly to the cowards and fools who don't understand him. Within days, he will begin work on the lost book. June 1928. The location is Hitler's home in Munich. A letter from Joseph Berg, who later safeguards the manuscript, reveals that Hitler has secluded himself with Max Amann, Hitler's former sergeant in World War I. Amann published Mein Kampf. Now he will personally take dictation for his leader's second book. The manuscript will never be edited. It is stream of consciousness dictation, Hitler's uncensored thoughts. To Weinberg, the lost book answers a great mystery. What did Hitler really intend? Many have claimed Hitler was a master manipulator whose only true goal was power. Weinberg believes they could not be more mistaken. After 4 years of campaigning, Hitler's calls for an alliance with Mussolini and a new war have failed to sway voters. Yet Hitler stubbornly refuses to change.
He now, at great length, argues that he was right all along, and those who may have voted against him are mistaken. So what one sees here is an individual who has fixed ideas that however loony they may be, he really believes, insists are correct, and is gonna stick to regardless.
As Hitler begins to dictate, he gives us perhaps the clearest view of the inner workings of his mind. Chapter 1. Hitler begins by explaining why only he can save the world from darkness.
You open the second book, and right away, there is Hitler telling us all about world history, announcing that after great study, he has discovered the rules, he said, that guide what he calls the sledgehammer of history.
Hitler claims that history is nothing more than the brute struggle of races for existence. The highest duty of politics, he writes, is the preservation of the life of a people. And Hitler believes his duty is to preserve the Aryan people from destruction.
He always says either the Aryan race will win this war for existence or it will be entirely eradicated. It is always about yes and no in very, very extreme black and white terms.
So Hitler's conscience is clear. It is his duty to be ruthless, to preserve the German nation by any means.
No atrocity is too horrible to consider if it advances the cause of the race and if it furthers the struggle for existence. But it is logic gone mad. It is reason gone mad. He has a powerful and undisciplined intellect hitched to a truly malevolent spirit.
In the following chapters, Hitler argues that Germany does not have enough land to feed itself. And without more land, the Aryan nation is doomed. Advances in agriculture alone, he claims, can never feed Germany's expanding population. Using birth control to limit population growth would sap the nation of its racial strength, because nature could not select the fittest individuals from large families. And importing food in exchange for German industrial exports would leave Germany vulnerable to a crippling blockade and conquest by others. Hitler's arguments lead him again and again to the same conclusion. To survive, Germany must seize land through war. Every healthy people, he writes, sees nothing sinful in the acquisition of land, but rather something natural.
For Hitler, a race that stops expanding in the literal sense, that stops acquiring territory, has begun to decline. It is the first step towards destruction by another race, which is simply hungrier.
In the Lost Book, Hitler is so detailed, he even reveals how much land he first wants to seize from Russia and Poland. An additional 500,000 square kilometers of land in Europe, Hitler writes, can provide millions of German farmers with new homesteads and can add to the strength of the German people. But in 1928, Germany has just 100,000 troops. How can this weak, defeated country conquer the East? Now Hitler reveals his strategy. He begins with France, Germany's traditional enemy. Germany's neighbor is the most dangerous, he warns, because her warplanes can strike most of the fatherland within an hour. First, Hitler must defeat France. Only then will he have a free hand to conquer Poland and Russia. But Hitler knows that England and Italy would object to German expansion, so he plans to offer them a deal. In the short term, the three powers can carve up the world. Germany will control most of Europe. Mussolini's Italy can expand into the Mediterranean. And England will keep her colonies. Hitler devotes many pages to proving that the British will never oppose German control of Europe, as long as Germany does not threaten their ocean empire.
Both peoples were Nordic, both peoples were anti-communist. In Hitler's view, the true alliance that should have occurred as a result of the war was the British fighting on the German side.
But most startling of all is another revelation. For years, scholars have debated whether Hitler's territorial ambitions ended in Europe. But Weinberg believes that the lost book lays this question to rest. Wherever our success ends, Hitler writes, that will always be the starting point of a new battle.
The second book is very explicit that each war will provide Germany with the basis for the next one.
For Hitler, conflict was not merely normal, it was positive, it was affirmative. This is the way history develops.
And now, looming on the horizon, Hitler sees that all his battles in Europe will lead him to one ultimate and decisive war against America. In his lost book, Hitler argues again and again that Germany must wage war. But as he reaches chapter 9, he makes his most stunning revelation. For the first time ever, he explains why he must attack America. Hitler mistakenly believes that the United States is dominated almost entirely by Aryan immigrants from Germany and other Nordic countries. He calls them Europe's most racially fit.
He says in his second book that the farm boy who emigrated to America 150 years ago was the boldest young man in his village, and now he's going to America to sow his wild oats, and his descendants will also be racially superior. Whereas the people who stay tend to be the cowards and the weaklings.
It is not by chance, Hitler writes, that the American Union is the state in which by far the greatest number of bold inventions are taking place. And Hitler envies the United States' seemingly unlimited resources.
Hitler looks to America as sort of a developmental model in the 1920s. America could produce all of the food that it needed and didn't have to import any of this. America also had most of the raw materials it needed.
But now, in 1928, 11 years before the Second World War, Hitler will explain why the United States is not just a model to look up to, but also Germany's ultimate enemy. Despite admiring Henry Ford, who shares his anti-Semitism, Hitler bemoans the prevalence of Ford automobiles in Germany. We must watch how American vehicles are proliferating, even in our own country, he says. Hitler claims that America's abundant natural resources and huge internal market will always allow the United States to manufacture cheaper goods. Germany will never be able to compete. It will always remain a second-rate, poor nation. And now Hitler sees another danger. In 1924, the United States enacted quotas that restricted the immigration of people Hitler thought were inferior, Asians and Eastern and Southern Europeans, while favoring immigrants from Western and Northern Europe.
From Hitler's point of view, this was a process which over time would strengthen the United States and weaken Germany as the most adventurous and the best of the racially best left Europe for the United States.
To Hitler, the threat that the United States will grow even more powerful while sapping Germany of its Aryan strength can only be answered by war. In the future, Hitler writes, the only state that will be able to stand up to North America will be the state that has understood how to raise the racial value of its people. It is the duty of the Nationalist Socialist movement to strengthen and prepare our own fatherland to the greatest degree possible for this task.
From his point of view, the sooner Germany could fight the United States, the better. You have to do it eventually anyway, but the longer it's deferred, the more difficult it becomes because of this immigration process.
It's a matter of time. The whole notion of preventive war has always been based precisely on this notion. Can you wait long enough for your enemy to be too strong for you to be able to defeat?
The Lost Book lays bare Hitler's ambition. For his German racial state to last 1,000 years, he must ruthlessly eliminate all resistance. First, he will conquer the fertile and oil-rich lands of Europe. Then he will have the resources and might to defeat America, his greatest obstacle to world domination. By mid-July 1928, Hitler has dictated the 324th and final page of his Lost Book. No one who reads it will misunderstand him now. Yet his next step is a mystery. He gives it to his publisher to lock away, with strict orders that no one is ever to see it. Why? Weinberg suspects it may be because in 1928, Mein Kampf is selling very poorly. Hitler's publisher may have convinced him not to bring out a new book that would only compete for sales. But in his diary, Albert Speer, Hitler's close associate, hints at another explanation. Hitler has second thoughts about revealing his master plan to foreign powers.
It laid Hitler's cards on the table much too clearly. A book in which Hitler is calling for a major conquest of space is simply not something that he wanted in the public domain.
To foreign observers, Hitler's plans will remain obscure, but his goals will not change. Coming up, Hitler begins putting his lost plan into place by secretly designing weapons to attack the United States. October 1929. The international stock market crashes and helps rescue Adolf Hitler from political oblivion. Almost a quarter of Germany's labor force is soon unemployed. Suddenly, large crowds respond to Hitler's call for German pride and strength. Hitler soon rises to power, and Mein Kampf becomes a bestseller. Although Hitler has not published his lost book, buried in Mein Kampf are also calls for ethnic cleansing and war. Yet few heed its warnings.
There was a reluctance at the time, and there still is a reluctance to believe that anyone would rationally say that they want to conquer the world, that they want to enslave millions of people, that they want to carry out mass murder, and that they actually mean it.
1937. 2 years before the war starts, Hitler begins to implement his plan from the Lost Book. He is already preparing to attack not just Europe, but America. Hitler secretly approves a plan for 6 H-class super battleships for his war across the ocean. They will weigh over 17,000 tons more than the largest American battleships. Hitler wants them to carry 18-inch diameter guns that can far outfire the American 16-inchers. And the proof that these ships were intended for America? According to German military records, Hitler expects to conquer England and France as early as 1943. But he doesn't expect these battleships to be ready until 1944.
If Germany were to have conquered Europe by the time these battleships were ready to go, then it is clear that these battleships could only have been intended for an eventual war against the United States.
In 1937, Hitler also secretly commissions Messerschmitt to develop the Me-264, dubbed the America Bomber.
The bomber is designed to drop a payload on New York City or other American cities on the East Coast and return to the Eastern Hemisphere.
The Me-264 will push the limits of aeronautic design. It will fly 12,000 miles without refueling and carry over 4,000 pounds of bombs. September 1939. Hitler invades Poland. He quickly makes good on his promises in his lost book. The populations of hundreds of Polish villages are deported or murdered. Jews and non-Jews alike. Ethnic Germans are settled in their place. The Nazi plan initially calls for over 30 million Slavs to be displaced or eliminated. June 1940. Hitler quickly defeats France as he wrote he would.
Frankreich's Armeen sind zerschlagen.
Now he negotiates with France's new collaborationist government and with fascist Spain for military bases in Morocco and the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa. He plans to use them for his super battleships and America bombers. June 1941, Hitler invades Russia. Then, in December, the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor. Hitler is still fighting England and Russia. In the Lost Book, Hitler's master plan calls for him to complete his wars in Europe before he takes on America. But Hitler does not wait.
Within an hour of hearing of the attack on Pearl Harbor, Hitler immediately has the Navy notified, start sinking.
Many historians have wondered why Hitler foolishly declares war on the United States, while his army is still bogged down in Europe. But to Weinberg, the answer is clear. First, Hitler now has the powerful Japanese Navy on his side. And Hitler has reversed his view of the United States. In the Lost Book, he saw America as a rival Nordic power. But now he believes that the intermingling of races has turned America into a degenerate, weak nation dominated by Jews.
Many of the miscalculations that Hitler makes are based on the idea that a country's fighting capability is somehow determined by its racial makeup. Ideology is really no basis for a foreign policy.
April 1945. The Russians enter Berlin. Despite Hitler's belief in Aryan superiority, it is the Allies who triumph. Hitler's super battleships were never finished. But the Nazis did build 2 prototypes of the America bomber. And during the war, they developed other secret weapons intended for the United States. Had Hitler been able to buy more time, he would have brought war to American soil. To Weinberg, Hitler's Lost Book offers a powerful lesson. Hitler clearly described his plans in his writings long before he took power. And to the world's surprise, he did exactly what he said he would.
Our current widespread cynical view that politicians don't believe what they're saying and have no intentions of carrying out what they promised to carry out is a very dangerous illusion. Then it was, and it is today.
There are a lot of voices today, and you don't have to look very far, voicing the same opinions about the need to eradicate whole groups of people, about the need to conquer entire countries, to destroy entire cultures. We don't want to believe that they actually mean it. And I think we have to keep in mind that they may well mean exactly what they say.
Had the lost book been published, would people have believed that Hitler really meant what he wrote? We will never know.
Every leader has a private physician, but Hitler's Dr. Morell was the ultimate drug pusher. Cocaine, opiates, methamphetamines. From 1936, he administered a daily dose of drugs that kept Hitler dazed and confused. How did one man wield a mystical power over High Hitler? Next on the History Channel.